So we're in 2 Samuel 19, sort of a part two from last week, as we finish out the storyline of David and Mephibosheth. We just barely touched on this text last week, just in a summary fashion. So I thought it'd be worth it to dig down into it in more detail. So I'll read 2 Samuel 19, 9 through 30. And we'll start with what you notice from the text. So this is much later in the story of David, after the revolt of Absalom, the son of David. And David is now on his way back to Jerusalem. So all the people were disputing throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, "The king delivered us from the hand of our enemies and saved us from the hand of the Philistines. Now he has fled out of the land because of Absalom. But Absalom, whom we anointed over us, is dead in battle. Now, therefore, why do you say nothing about bringing the king back?" King David sent this message to the priests Zadok and Abiathar. "Say to the elders of Judah, why should you be the last to bring the king back to his house? The talk of all Israel has come to the king. You are my kin. You are my bone and my flesh. Why then should you be the last to bring back the king? And say to Amasa, are you not my bone and my flesh? So may God do to me and more, if you are not commander of my army from now on, in place of Joab." Amasa swayed the hearts of all the people of Judah as one. And they sent word to the king, "Return, both you and all your servants." So the king came back to the Jordan. And Judah came to Gilgal to meet the king and to bring him over the Jordan. Shimei, son of Gera, a Benjamite from Bahurim, hurried to come down with the people of Judah to meet King David. With him were 1,000 people from Benjamin, and Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, with his 15 sons and his 20 servants, rushed down to the Jordan ahead of the king, while the crossing was taking place, to bring over the king's household and to do his pleasure. Shimei, son of Gera, fell down before the king as he was about to cross the Jordan, and said to the king, "May my lord not hold me guilty, or remember how your servant did wrong on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem. May the king not bear it in mind, for your servant knows that I have sinned. Therefore, see, I have come this day, the first of all the house of Joseph, to come down to meet my lord the king." Abishai, son of Zeruiah, answered, "Shall not Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the Lord's anointed?" But David said, "What have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah, that you should today become an adversary to me? Shall anyone be put to death in Israel this day? Or do I not know that I am this day king over Israel?" The king said to Shimei, "You shall not die." And the king gave him his oath. Mephibosheth, grandson of Saul, came down to meet the king. He had not taken care of his feet, or trimmed his beard, or washed his clothes, from the day the king left until the day he came back in safety. When he came from Jerusalem to meet the king said to him, "Why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth?" He answered, "Well, my lord, O king, my servant deceived me. For your servant said to him, 'Saddle a donkey for me, so that I may ride on it and go with the king.' For your servant is lame. He has slandered your servant to my lord the king. But my lord the king is like the angel of God. Do therefore what seems good to you. For all my father's house were doomed to death before my lord the king. But you set your servant among those who eat at your table. What further right have I then to appeal to the king?" The king said to him, "Why speak any more of your affairs? I have decided. You and Ziba shall divide the land." Mephibosheth said to the king, Let him take it all, since my lord the king has arrived home safely. All right. When you notice what stands out to you, what questions are raised?
Say there's any specific question I have, but I felt confused all the way through it.
Yeah.
Just lost.
Okay.
Wow. I thought that was because I wasn't here last week, but I don't know, that's true. So I'm looking back up the notes from last week going, maybe if I just look back up, find.
You won't find much up there.
Okay. All right.
I mean, I think
I feel lost.
it seems relevant that we kind of skipped over, Absalom coming into power and some of that
Yeah.
stuff. We kind of just skipped right over that. David's re-entering. So that's kind of relevant, right?
Yeah. We're doing what they do on the streaming series these days. Just jump all over.
I mean, you don't get the story about how Shimei curses him,
Mhm.
So it's kind of important to see that.
Yeah. Well, I've got it written down here on here. We'll read that text. Okay, so it feels confusing. We've jumped pretty far forward in the timeline. But it's the end of the story of Mephibosheth that we started last week.
I just find the
Yeah.
way the story's being told, the language is used, I don't know, to me, it was just hard to follow.
Yeah.
And I think the style of storytelling, I don't know,
Mhm.
or the quotes, I think even when he's addressing King David, he almost talks back, he's not there, but he's a third party or something.
Mhm. Yeah, and there's a lot of formality to this whole section here. It feels like very, very formal.
It almost feels like, when you voted somebody out and then they get back into power.
Right.
And you're like, don't tell me because I voted you out back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's
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 exactly
what
what
it
we've
is.
got here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absalom has driven David out of Jerusalem, and all these folks said, "Yay, Absalom! We love you! We love you!" And now he's dead and defeated, and David's coming back, and now they're saying, "David,
David, we love you.
we love you. We love you. Don't kill us." Yeah.
Well, that's helpful.
It
Okay.
is-
So,
I
go
was
ahead.
gonna say, it's interesting just with Mephibosheth, because I think in general, I've always kind of felt like, I didn't sympathize with him, in this revolt. I kind of felt like he was, I'll say, playing his cards. But it's interesting in the end that David really says, okay, divide everything between you and Ziba.
Mhm.
He doesn't really discount either party. And we talked about that last week, but I think it's kind of amazing, really.
It really is. Yeah. And at some point, Dale said something similar to this, that, this is pretty late in the story of David, and yet David's portrayed in a very good light here. Seemingly extraordinarily gracious and generous and forgiving and strategic in all of this. So I think it's important for us to remember that. Okay, let's just kind of jump in. So some introductory comments here. This is back page 74 or page 74. So Walter Brueggemann, the Civil War was more than a son challenging a father. So Absalom challenging David. Absalom, attractive figure that he was, became a magnet who evoked and mobilized a variety of forces and parties hostile to or weary of David. The elimination of Absalom and the end of the fighting did not cause the hostility to melt easily away. David was left with the problem of how to reclaim the loyalty of those who had opposed him. This section deals with the aftermath of the Civil War. So I think it's a really great, master course in watching someone deal with people who have been just the absolute worst in a lot of ways, and seeing what he does with that. So this next quote has to do with those first few verses there in 9 through 11. Well, and 9 through 15. Okay. So David's first act to consolidate his power is to send a message to his old Hebron-based colleagues, the elders of Judah. So we might remember it's the elders of Judah who first anoint David, besides Samuel. But it's the elders of Judah who say, yeah, we want David to be the king. So David's first act here post the revolt is to go to them. And they had supported Absalom. So David chides Judah for being slow to support, even when all Israel, the north, has agreed to rejoin David. So once again, David's trying to, unite the kingdom. The north's already said, we're good with David, go David, but now the elders of Judah need to get on board. David reminds the southern elders that their relationship was the earliest base of David's power. The language of bone and flesh echoes the initial northern offer of kingship. So we saw this language all the way back in 2 Samuel 5. But the appeal here looks past the northern appeal to the earlier appeal of the Judeans back in 2 Samuel 2. It's the Judeans who are, in the first instance, David's bone and flesh. And he not only chides in order to win their loyalty, but he also negotiates. So David promises that Amasa, one of his own kinsmen who led Absalom's forces, would become his new commander. This is an enormous bargaining gesture. Amasa's ascendance means the displacement of Joab, who's the current commander. The daring act of displacing Joab must have indicated how needful David was of Judean support and how willing he was to accommodate. So you see that there in verse 13, and say to Amasa, are you not my bone and flesh? So may God do to me and more if you are not the commander of my army from now on in place of Joab. So why do you think David would enlist Amasa as his commander here? Someone who's been on the opposing side. And what similar examples could you think of in modern times? And what, if any, lessons do you think that specifically presents for dealing with conflict?
It was politically shrewd, but I imagine David's probably pretty steamed at Joab by now. Because Joab's killed several people when other solutions might have been possible. He killed Abner earlier, and killed Absalom. And somehow David never got over Absalom really being his favorite, even though a rebel.
Yeah.
And Joab probably knew that if he brought Absalom back alive, David would restore him to favoritism. And Joab just takes things into his hands, nothing doing. He's, and in a lot of ways, this is more novelization than actually the text, but Joab, in some way, Joab's the guy who does the realpolitik. That, I'm going to secure the throne for David, and I'm not messing around. There goes Abner. There goes Absalom, and David's going, wait a second. So, but in addition, it makes a lot of sense to enlist the commander of the opposition army to your side. Yeah.
So there's that pending story of Joab playing itself out here. And maybe Joab knew David too well. I know exactly what's going to happen if I bring Absalom back.
That's what I'm thinking.
Alive. look at this guy, he's too forgiving.
Mhm.
And so. I'll just
Oh,
take care
I
of
would
it.
say modern day, for me, this reminded me of Kamala Harris becoming the vice president nominee.
Oh, yeah,
Even though she was like front runner going against Joe Biden at the
Mm.
time. So it's like, okay, everybody was so confused. Why would you choose her? It makes no sense, but it was like something that you had to do to
Mhm,
make sure there is no revolt, there is no another rise.
mhm. Yeah,
So
yeah,
Mhm.
so it could be a case of keep your friends closer and enemies closer, or make a friend of your enemy.
Right,
yeah,
Okay.
or put them where they can do the most good and the least damage,
Yeah.
maybe.
Mhm. Hello, Laconia. All right, verse 16. Oh, go ahead, Julie.
I was gonna say, it's a little hard for me because I think Joab has tried to serve David's interest, even though it may not have been according to his wishes, but it's a little hard for me to completely dismiss him
Mhm.
Mhm.
as
Yeah.
having had value in this whole story.
Mhm.
Right,
David,
Yeah, it does feel a little unjust. Unfair.
It seems like people ask for loyalty to an individual versus what's best for the country.
Mm.
Or maybe what, if people step back and say, well, what would God want, it's a different, those are all different questions.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, so we might argue that Joab had the whole kingdom in mind
Mhm,
with that, but what David's concerned about is
mhm,
more personal.
mhm.
16 through 23, the story of Shammai. So the case of Shammai is the most difficult. We've seen that Shammai speaks for a continuing Saulite constituency who held David responsible for the deaths in the Saul party. So here's the text back in 2 Samuel 16, 5 through 14. In the midst of the revolt. As David and his party passed Barim, a man came out of the village cursing them. It was Shammai, son of Gera, a member of Saul's family. He threw stones at the king and the king's officers and all the mighty warriors who surrounded them. Get out of here, you murderer, you scoundrel, he shouted at David. The Lord is paying you back for murdering King Saul and his family. You stole his throne, and now the Lord has given it to your son Absalom. At last you will taste some of your own medicine, you murderer. Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Abishai demanded. Let me go over and strike off his head. No, the king said. If the Lord has told him to curse me, who am I to say no? My own son is trying to kill me, and this Benjaminite is merely cursing me. Leave him alone, for no doubt the Lord has told him to do it. And perhaps the Lord will see that I'm being wronged and will bless me because of these curses. So David and his men continued on, and Shammai kept pace with them on a nearby hillside, cursing as he went, throwing stones at David and tossing dust into the air. The king and all those who were with him were weary by the time they reached Bahurim. So they stayed there a while and rested. So then, we come to verse 16. Shammai, son of Gera, Benjaminite from Bahurim, hurried to come down with the people of Judah to meet King David. With him were 1,000 people from Benjamin. So this meeting takes place at the Jordan. So the commentary from Brueggemann, but Shammai is no fool. He knows he must deal with this David, whom he has labeled a man of blood, a murderer. Shammai therefore comes to meet David and brings with him an impressive array of Benjaminite people, including Ziba, which we sort of need to bring some closure to the Mephibosheth story. Shammai is as profusely supportive now as he was crossly hostile before. I'm not quite sure about that. He was a little more enthusiastic with his hostility.
Yeah.
He makes an honest statement that acknowledges previous realities, but also indicates that he's the first in his support of David. Shammai offers David a gesture of solidarity that may in fact secure David's gratitude and Shammai's survival. As in the earlier meeting with Shammai, Abishai wants to kill. It's kind of funny, because back in 2 Samuel 16, verse 9, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Abishai demanded. Let me go over and strike off his head. And then in our text tonight,
Verse
That's a
5.
put to
help me out, where is it?
21.
Oh, there you go, 21. Abishai, son of Zeruiah, answered, shall not Shammai be put to death for this? He seems like a hothead.
Mhm.
No.
Okay, so why, in your estimation, why does David forgive and even save Shammai? Because he does seem to save his life here. And what, if any, modern examples can you think of? And what, if any, lessons does that have for dealing with conflict today?
I mean, it seems as if David has allowed that Shammai maybe have been right to curse him. He's obviously made some pretty grave mistakes up to this point as he's leaving. I think he recognizes those. That God has restored his kingdom back to him. The fact that Shammai is now saying, kind of admitting that. I don't think it was expected. I think David even is saying that I don't really deserve this on some level. I don't know. That's some thoughts around that.
Yeah, that's very insightful. Yeah. Especially looking at how David handled the curses in the moment. That
Mhm.
to him, it wasn't black and white. There's some gray area there.
Yeah, he didn't kill him for cursing him, or didn't let somebody else kill him for cursing him, and
Mhm.
seems like he's not big on just killing everybody that disagrees, or that's one option, leaders sometimes take, is you go in and you just get rid of all the people that were against you. And that doesn't seem to be David's point at all. He's much more complicated, or much, sees much more the human parts of why you might be with that person, why you might then, given the situation now has changed, might be able to do other things. But I think David, even though he's killed a lot of people, he probably doesn't see that as the best option all the time. He's killed a lot.
Yeah, and his David's statement in verse 22, shall anyone be put to death in Israel this day?
Yeah.
It just makes me think that David sees this as a day for reconciliation of some kind. This is not a day for death.
It's not a bloody day.
Yeah.
Was there any truth to Shammai's accusation that you murdered King Saul? I mean, that's not how the story reads, but
Right.
There's that person who comes and thinks he's gonna get credit, and David executes him. Calls in question, maybe there's something about the story we don't quite know.
And false stories circulate, or various stories circulated back then, I'm sure, like they do now.
I would say like David knew from his chat with Nathan back in the day with Bathsheba, and he knew that his son will take over. He will, be with his wives and concubines.
Okay.
Like he knew that, because he says here, like he's like, what if Lord wants me to do it, then who am I to question it? So I think like at this point, he's just like knows that this was prophesied. There is no way I would remain a king for now. And I kind of cheated. I kind of Googled it, but later on, Solomon kills him. Kills this guy.
Shemaiah.
Shemaiah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's like David's like, I didn't do it, but his son did it. So yeah,
That's
it's just interesting.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
he keeps his oath,
Yeah.
technically.
So there's knowledge that David has post, the incident with Bathsheba. That might
Yeah.
be important as he's facing all this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any modern day examples you can think of, or lessons this teaches about dealing with people throwing stones at you?
I think one lesson is, if they're throwing stones at you and you have a lot of flaws. You
have a lot of what?
be a little careful
Okay, okay,
to, I'm gonna say, retaliate.
yeah.
Well, I mean, I think probably those of us who are parents have told our kids, like, just ignore them, just walk away. Just, they're saying what they're saying, but don't engage, So we try to train our kids to grow up to not do that.
Mhm.
Yeah,
It's interesting to me that he, makes the trip down to the Jordan to catch David at this
Mhm.
crossing. And, because, I mean, he could have just hidden himself somewhere,
right.
gone somewhere else. But, he forces the interaction without knowing for sure how it's going to turn out.
Right.
So I don't know, maybe that says something about Shai.
Yeah,
The kind of person he
says
is.
he's sort of an active agent, but maybe why Solomon ultimately has to, but he's definitely gonna be in the mix,
Mhm.
like he was with Absalom and now he's gonna see how he can fare with Saul. I mean, legitimately, but he wants to be in the mix, prominent, very
Yeah.
prominent.
Yeah.
People do this all the time.
Hmm.
Somebody loses, they suck up to somebody else,
Yeah.
somebody goes, head of the company is, shown the door or whatever, and all the people, some of the people jockey to be, some of the, people that were most supportive of that one still want to be prominent in this one, so they're
Mhm.
gonna try for it anyway. Maybe
Yeah.
they get it, maybe they don't.
Yeah.
I saw that in the Texas State Capitol one day. They asked me to fly down there and sing the national anthem, and then Texas Our Texas in a perfunctory swearing in of the Speaker of the House, who happened to be from Midland. So I flew down there. And there was a faction of people trying to oust the Speaker of the House, but they didn't want to do it in a public vote, because if they nominated somebody and this nominee lost, then they'd all be exposed as being enemies of the winner. And so something that should have taken, 30 minutes and I'd be gone and, partying with my cousin in Austin, it took all day long because they tried to work it around and do it, in committees and everything where nobody was exposed. And it was, very interesting process. It was very long, but yeah, nobody wanted to, come out as being against the current speaker in case, their man lost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess you couldn't do your thing till all that got sorted out.
Yeah, I
Right.
did the one and then 8 hours later. Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Lovely.
Okay, so Mephibosheth, and down the bottom, page 75, number 6. Like the others, Mephibosheth has taken the initiative to make a 20-mile trek from the Jerusalem area to meet the king at the ford of the Jordan. However, Mephibosheth must have made proportionally more effort than the others, since he was lame in both feet. And it didn't really say much about that, but it's just an interesting little detail there that somehow he's made it from Jerusalem to this crossing of the Jordan in pretty bad shape. Mephibosheth's appearance during his audience with the king also was considerably more unflattering. He'd not taken care of his feet, or trimmed his mustache, or washed his clothes from the day the king left Jerusalem until that day. Such inattention to details But personal health and hygiene made Mephibosheth look as if he'd been profoundly mourning for a considerable period of time. He certainly did not look like a pretender to the throne who'd been actively trying to take back his grandfather's kingdom, which was the story that Ziba told. It also signified that Mephibosheth had deliberately identified himself as ceremonially unclean during David's absence. What do you think this season of life must have been like for Mephibosheth?
Unsettled.
Unsettled.
That's gonna happen to me now.
Mm-hmm. Uncertain future. Lonely, maybe.
Clearly, he probably doesn't have the same promise of, grace and life with Absalom on the throne.
Yeah, that's right. Number 9 is a prominent member of David's household. Mephibosheth should have accompanied the king in his exodus from Jerusalem in the middle of the revolt. But Ziba, his steward, had turned traitor and maligned him. 2 Samuel 16, when David had passed a little beyond the summit, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, met him with a couple of donkeys, saddled, carrying 200 loaves of bread, 100 bunches of raisins, 100 summer fruits, and 1 skin of wine. The king said to Ziba, "Why have you brought these?" Ziba answered, "The donkeys are for the king's household to ride. The bread and summer fruit are for the young men to eat, and the wine is for those to drink who faint in the wilderness." The king said, "Where is your master's son, Mephibosheth?" Ziba said to the king, "He remains in Jerusalem, for he said, 'Today the house of Israel will give me back my grandfather's kingdom.'" Then the king said to Ziba, "All that belonged to Mephibosheth is now yours." Ziba said, "I do obeisance. Let me find favor in your sight, my lord, the king." So one thing we know is that right now Mephibosheth doesn't have many resources because they've all been handed over to Ziba. So David, however, was at a loss, not knowing what to believe. The appearance of the man, especially his untrimmed beard, gave unambiguous evidence of the genuineness of his claim to have been grieving for the king's return. Mephibosheth, who's been seriously disadvantaged by his lameness, genuinely pays homage to the one he calls my lord the king 5 times. He acknowledges his utter dependence on the king, asks for nothing except what the king sees fit to do, and put himself in the king's hand. Once again, he refers to David 5 times as my lord the king. Verse 26, 27, twice, 28, 30. And refers to himself 3 times as your servant or your slave. Verses 26, 27, and 28. Mephibosheth placed his fate fully in the hands of the king, comparing David to an angel of God. He trusted David's handling of this matter would be from God. Humbly, Mephibosheth noted that David had already given him far more than he deserved. As one of Saul's descendants, he deserved nothing but death. That David had given him the opposite of what he deserved. Therefore, he would make no more appeals to the king. So why do you feel like Mephibosheth behaves the way that he does in this interaction with David? Is it genuine?
I mean, I would say.
You would say
because
this.
he doesn't really have anything to do. He's no legs to be able to conquer something himself without any help. And like you said, everything has been taken away, which is so strange because even if David told somebody like, "Yeah, it's yours now," how do you claim that when you go back? How do you say like, "Oh yeah, by the way, this is what David told me"? It may have been a written document or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he doesn't have anything to. I don't think he would have taken over anyhow. There is no strength in his body to be able to do that himself.
Yeah.
And it just feels like recognizing he's totally dependent on David.
Yeah, yeah, he's in a tough spot.
Mhm.
By all appearances, his mourning seems genuine.
Mhm.
It seems like he's really come to care for David.
Yeah, he had many dinners with him,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, yep. And ate at the Lord's table every day,
Mhm.
at the king's table every day. He's very respectful.
Mhm.
My lord the king, my lord the king, my lord the king, 5 times.
Yeah. Kind of emphasizing no threat from me.
Yes.
That's the relationship we're gonna have.
Mm,
You're my lord the king.
Mm.
And
I'm the servant.
I'm the servant.
Mhm.
Civil wars are tough, aren't they?
Yeah. Number 14 at the bottom of that page, David finds himself in an embarrassing situation. He'd been so grateful for Ziba's gift of provisions on the outward journey. We read that text, that he believed the story about Mephibosheth's aspirations after the throne and had given all Saul's lands to Ziba in a sudden fit of gratitude. Ziba had already arrived to declare his allegiance in the text tonight. But now David, confronted with Jonathan's son, whom was wrongly suspected of subversion, deprived of his rightful lands, as torn as what he should do. Impatiently, so Baldwin is disappointed in how David responds. Impatiently, he decrees, "You and Ziba shall divide the land." The decision sounds just, but in fact, it unjustly favors Ziba, who has obtained the property by deception, and it deprives Mephibosheth, who, because of his disability, deserved to be defended against those who would take advantage of him, of half of his estate. The one who comes out of the incident unscathed is the crippled Mephibosheth, who rises above financial considerations and takes genuine pleasure in the return of his lord the king safely. It's sad to see David's grudging response to the genuine warmth of Jonathan's son, who has himself suffered and who understands what the king has had to endure. So that's one commentator's interpretation of the event, that Mephibosheth's being treated unfairly here, and still Mephibosheth sort of rises above that, because what really matters to him is David's safe return. But others see it a little differently here. David had previously given Saul's estate to Ziba for 2 reasons: to reward him for invaluable support provided during David's flight from Jerusalem, and to punish Mephibosheth for his supposed betrayal. Now that Mephibosheth had apparently exonerated himself, David removed the punishment he had inflicted on Jonathan's son. David decreed a compromise that permitted Ziba to retain a reward for his service to the crown, and yet permitted the king to keep faith with commitments made to Jonathan many years before. So this commentator Bergen says, no, that's exactly what David should have been. So what do you think? Is David justified in making this decision about the estate of Saul, basically, and what's done with it?
Everything that Ziba gave to David as he was leaving would have been Mephibosheth's, would it not? It would not have been, I mean, Ziba's a servant, would he have owned anything? So all the support that was given did not really truly come from him. He stole it from
Mephibosheth.
Yeah,
That's a really good point.
I mean,
Yeah. Because he's
so
just
to still, yeah, so to still reward him for that seems.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
I'm just thinking though that there's probably a lot of wealth in here. It's like, when everybody's got plenty, what's the big deal? You know, like what's not? It's not like we're talking about survival and not survival. We're talking about lots and lots,
Right,
you know?
Okay,
maybe so, and if he takes it all away from Ziba, then doesn't he gain an enemy? I mean, maybe he decides, you know, if you take it all away, then you. Ziba might, who knows what, you might have to kill him or something, you know, I mean,
mhm,
this way you've got maybe two people that are backing you, that are
Hmm.
pretty strong with.
mhm.
What Debbie said, if they've got enough wealth and stuff like that, then, cause Ziba seems like a player, you know, he's gonna get involved and do stuff.
Yeah.
No matter what, so you might as well give him something to work, to be content with, maybe.
Right, yeah, don't rock that boat.
Yeah, don't make another enemy.
It is
Julie?
kind of funny, because I feel a little bit like Mephibosheth is the deceiver, or that's just my feeling about things. So David just says, I don't really know. I can't know who's right here, so I'm just gonna split everything up.
Hmm,
And
There you go.
that's good because, you know, they both can live with that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
he needed Ziba in his moment because they had to do something to survive that trek, and who knew how long that was gonna be. You know, Mephibosheth is not there. I don't, maybe it's Ziba as a player. I don't know. My sense is I don't trust Mephibosheth. He's a little bit too obvious, or he's a little too, I don't know, just something about him doesn't
Mm.
fit for me.
Mhm.
But David is just kind of saying, I'll never know.
Hmm.
At
Yeah,
least
That's a good point.
so the right thing to do is to make them both whole and happy.
Yeah.
mhm, mhm.
Definitely.
But
Yeah.
the last sentence in the section has Mephibosheth saying,
Yeah.
let him have it all.
Yeah,
I mean, if he truly gave it all up, then that proves his.
Mhm.
Mm.
Or maybe it shows his the way he just, you know, I mean, his style, you know what I'm saying? I
yeah,
don't know what it is.
Julie's
Why
not gonna give an inch on
Yeah.
I'm a
Mephibosheth.
Mephibosheth supporter here.
Evil, the monster Mephibosheth.
It is kind of in character. I mean, the minute David left, he, you know, was in mourning, let himself go, did all that stuff. So he's very much like, I just jumped to the, you know, most drastic thing. And then when he gives him that, he's like, no, just give it all to him, you know, whatever.
Yeah, there's
One of
sort of
those.
a
I feel like it's
dramatic.
a
Yeah.
personality disorder there.
Yeah, it's just, you know, it's like, oh,
Now, people who've been damaged when they're young, they have personality disorders.
that's true. They did. I'm sure a lot of these did.
Mm.
The higher up you in power, the more screwed
Yeah,
up you
well,
are.
and he was, like, he fell when he was a child, you know. he was
Yeah.
always-
Yeah,
So he was a survivor, right?
Yeah.
So
Mm, yeah,
Carrie still.
it still goes back to, you know, how can you really know who was right and who was wrong? And David just did also the generous thing of not trying to figure it out.
Mhm.
mhm,
Yeah.
yeah.
Going back to parenting, you sound like a good parent.
I don't know. I still feel like the whole thing's unfair. I think
Mephibosheth.
he should have put a little bit of an effort to figure out if Ziba was lying the whole time and stealing. I mean, because it's rewarding someone who lied and stole,
Mhm.
you know, and.
But Ziba
totally
helped him,
betrayed.
right? Meaning he couldn't have made that
Yeah.
trek without what Ziba did. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
maybe he could, but probably he needed all those supplies.
David.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But I think it's a good point that Ziba's only resources really came from Mephibosheth's
To begin with.
property.
Right.
So, yeah.
I want him to
That's
make
very-
some effort to figure out. I mean, because that guy's a criminal. If if it's as true as it seems to be,
Mhm.
But
it just feels very unjust. I don't
a
know.
few weeks ago, a text a while ago where Mephibosheth comes into all that property, and then David kind of turns to Ziba and says, oh, and you get to be his servant,
Mhm.
Yeah, I
you
always
know?
felt like that was part of.
So I mean,
Oh,
there's more going on in this story than we will ever know.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Because
that's
it
for
doesn't feel
sure.
like he's just quite a servant, kind of like more like he's the
Manager.
man, he's a
Yeah,
high ranking person.
yeah, definitely.
I mean, he always has a place at King's Table, so do you really need, I mean, you're the last survivor of your house.
Hmm.
You know, I mean, I read he'd end up having a son, but. I mean, you kind of are last of someone that David would actually care about, you know.
Mhm.
You're always gonna have a place at King's Table regardless if you have a property or not, so.
Yeah,
Give it to him anyways.
so maybe that's Mephibosheth's way of ensuring that Ziba is never gonna be an enemy to you.
Yeah,
You know, just gonna give it all. I know David's gonna take care of me.
Yeah,
He's
Yeah.
demonstrated that so
yeah, and
far.
it doesn't look like it's his servant anymore because didn't he come with the other guy, right? Ziba came earlier in the text with Shimei, right?
Said he had already arrived, yeah.
He came with the Benjamites and Shimei. Right?
Yeah, Shema comes, 1,000 people from Benjamin and Ziba, verse 17. Ziba, the
Yes.
servant of the house of Saul.
So. Yeah, so he's not his servant anymore regardless. So he's like, yeah, I don't want him back in my house.
Next to him as the servant.
Servant of the house of Saul instead of servant of.
of the house of Mephibosheth.
Yeah.
Mephibosheth.
Yeah,
I don't know, yeah, it's interesting. You know, how much to make of that language. I don't know.
maybe he just doesn't want him in his life. He's like, give him everything, keep him away from me.
That's probably.
Brueggemann's statement there in verse 17, Mephibosheth might have protested this settlement because Ziba now has half of his estate. He does not protest, rather he's grateful and loyal. This is how he interprets it. He's grateful and loyal. He knows that David is keeping his oath to Jonathan and to Saul, and that his safety is therefore assured. He can trust David, as can all of Saul's former supporters. So it may, for Mephibosheth in the end, it just may be a dramatic gesture of trust, more than anything about Ziba. Just
Mhm.
I want David to know that I'm the real deal here.
Right.
I'm not here to get anything back because I trust him. He's going to take care of me. What do you think of that, Julie?
By that. I mean, just
In
think that,
contrast
you know,
to how Julie experienced it when I, of course, I came across this when I was much younger, but just read it just now. Felt like he was the language he was using made me think that it was like, wow, if we could trust God the way Mephibosheth is saying, he's trusting David. You know, like, I'm totally dependent on you. I know you're my Lord, you're my King, and whatever you say goes. I don't need anything from anybody else because that I know I can trust you. It just feels like kind of what we should strive to be like.
Yeah. You should, that's a good sermon to preach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty powerful. That's a great.
Yeah, but if you obviously, come into it like, I don't know if I can trust it, but you're kind of like, okay, he's had a tough life and you see him as kind of a victim of life. He didn't have any family around him. He waited till David recognized him and took him in. He recognizes that David is his savior, we'll say.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It is a huge testimony to everyone else that's there, you know,
Mhm.
just that David is trustworthy and.
I'm gonna throw this out there. Ziba has to trust him too.
Who?
Ziba,
Ziba has to
Yeah.
trust him.
David, that the deal that he's made is not gonna evaporate.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And yeah, in the end, everybody that's come down to this crossing really has to put trust in David. That what happened there wasn't just a publicity stunt or something. That once David gets back to the city of Jerusalem, he sends out his assassins. So they have to trust that he's going to keep his word.
Mhm.
Anything else from that story? Okay.
Joab kills Manasseh.
Joab kills.
Manasseh, it's a postscript to the story.
Well, on that note.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, you know, what I get curious about is. What is the narrator? What is the writer, the redactor here? What do they think they're doing?
Yeah,
You know, and why are they doing it? I mean, I'm just saying, I don't know.
yeah.
I mean, it's not like the plan of salvation or anything. I mean, it's, so what, and then I wonder about, you know, how the book is compiled. And supposing it's not, you know, one author. Sometimes the stories may confuse us because there's actually two sources.
Mhm.
And one has one perspective and one has some, you know, more like the gospels.
Yeah.
You know, we're just like, what's going on here? Well, maybe one comes from one source and one comes from another.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, what's the intent of this story? What's the author's intent?
Yeah, and I mean, I don't ask the question casually. I mean, what matters to me is the nature of scripture itself.
Mhm.
And by which, and when you're in a section like this, you know, the people who say the Bible is a clear pattern for how we should live our lives and so on and so forth, apparently aren't talking about sections like this. It suggests to me they don't really know scripture.
Mhm.
They're making it up to their own advantage, proof texting and pulling this, that, and the other, and wrenching it together and saying, now this is how you ought to be.
Yeah.
Well, wait a second, I'm not sure this is a book that asks you to do that. And
Right.
when you get into the confusion of texts like this, raises the whole issue of the nature
Mhm.
of scripture.
Yeah. All right, thanks everybody for being with us tonight.